everyone! In today's video, I'm going to be showing you a design that is from the new Disney movie Raya and the Last Dragon, and this is going to be a two-part thing. So today is Raya and tomorrow is Sisu, the Last Dragon. And so today, like I said, it's Raya, and it's got, oh my goodness, the background of these nails is like drool worthy. It is so beautiful. I am absolutely in love with it. Both of them, and they've got such different tones, but they're pretty much the same thing, that kind of marbled ombre. And I did not want to cover up all of my hard work on that marbled ombre, so I offset the characters kind of to the side of the nail, and I actually love the way that looked because it kind of gave the nail so much more depth and dimension, and like it's more of a moving piece and an element, and not necessarily just a nail design, but more of a piece of art. So I hope you guys like this as much as I do, and I am really excited for this new movie. It is from the people that brought you Frozen, as the previews say, and I think it'll be good. I don't know. If anybody sees it, please let me know, because eventually I think this one would probably want to watch it. She loves dragons. Do you like dragons? Yeah. Yes, she does. In fact, she's wearing dragon-themed underwear today. Maybe that's too much information, but it is what it is. So I hope you guys like this design, and definitely come back for Sisu tomorrow. I actually like that one better, if I'm being completely honest. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye! So we are going to be sculpting our background with, like I said, a slightly marbled ombre, and we're going to begin with a very light aqua and then kind of slowly intensify the color. So I'm going to grab a two-tone bead each time, and I have a little bit of blue that I'm working in there that's a little bit less in the teal family, but just kind of these four colors. So I have a light aqua, a shimmery teal that's like a medium color, a bright sky blue, and then a darker teal color. So then once the marble is done and covering the nail, I'm going to use some really wet shimmery white acrylic and add a little bit more depth to the background of the design, and then add a little bit of shimmer flake, which is what this is right here. Just kind of like a pink iridescent hue to it. And I'm going to be encapsulating this nail with a layer of clear acrylic. Now this nail is super, super long. It is actually like an extreme long competition stiletto tip that I trimmed off to make it more of a kind of long square or long coffin shape. And so it's just, like I said, it's incredibly long. So instead of trying to, be fancy and do a one ball encapsulation, I didn't even attempt to do that because it just was not happening. And I opted instead to take my time with it and do 4 beads instead, which is perfectly acceptable. And then we're going to file the nail into shape with our e-file. And then afterwards, I would recommend going through with a hand file and just making sure the lines are clean and sharp. So now on the nail form backing, we're going to be sculpting Raya. So this particular Raya design, there's a bunch of different styles for her. If you look it up, I haven't seen the movie, obviously, but I've watched several previews for it, and there's so many different, different hairstyles that she has. But I loved the intensity of this particular pose that I chose, which is why I went with it. So her head is just slightly turned off to the side, and I used a tan color for her face with that. And then I'm going to use a yellow. And I didn't actually have the proper color of yellow for her shirt. It was not nearly this bright. It wasn't a prime yellow that it should have been. It was more of like a slightly green, kind of brownish tone yellow, much less, vibrant than this. So I'll have to tone it down a little bit with acrylic paint when I get to that step. So after I've got, there's the base of her face was already cured, I'm going to go back through with a second layer of the tan color acrylic, and I'm going to start sculpting in some of the different details to her face, like her nose, adding a little bit more height to her forehead. I want there to be a lot of detail to this design. I want it to be kind of extreme and over the top, certainly not wearable. Like I said in the intro, I love that because it's offset, it gives more of an art vibe, I suppose. There's no question that this design wouldn't be something that anybody would want to just wear because it wouldn't be comfortable or last or, be durable by any means, but it's a statement piece for it. So I really like that. So everything is really extreme with this. I'm going to add another layer to her shirt. Her shirt has kind of a wrap style with it. And so then after I have that done, I'm going to let that cure up, and I'm going to go back to her face. And then with a brown tone red, I'm going to be adding her lips in with that. And you could keep manipulating them until it is set up and the acrylic will not allow you to play with them anymore. Just kind of keep pressing them out until you get the shape that you're going for. And then after you have those done, then you can go back and you can do another layer to her shirt. Like I said, you kind of got to go back and forth, allowing layers to cure as you go so that you don't mess something up before as you're working on a different element next to it. So her shirt, like I said, it has kind of a wrap thing that goes across the front of it, and she has a jacket that fits over the top of it, so you don't have to sculpt it like all the way out to the sides or, you know, down her shoulders or anything, because that's going to be covered anyways. You just have to sculpt basically what's going to show, which will be across the front of her chest and then down towards her waist. So I'm going to take white acrylic and I'm going to be sculpting in her eyes. And if you wanted to do this with paint instead of doing it with acrylic, that is certainly an option for you. Recently though, I personally have found it easier to do more with acrylic and less with paint. And I would say 6 months ago, you would have heard me say the exact opposite. So it kind of depends on, you know, what you are used to, what your skill set, you know, caters to. And you know, if you are somebody that really loves acrylic, then absolutely, you know, sculpt as much as you can with acrylic and leave as little as possible for doing with paint or a gel product. But if you are somebody that, you know, only wants to do the bare bones with acrylic and do as much as you can with paint, then that's, you know, that's good for you. That works for you, and that's great. And there's so many times where I see videos and I see tutorials and people use phrases like, and then you have to do this, or this is the best way to do something. And in certain circumstances, yeah, there probably is a best way to do it. But typically I do not agree with those statements whatsoever, because what's best for one person most likely isn't going to be best for, you know, the next person. Everyone has their own little ways of doing things. And if it were me and you're, you know, kind of getting into sculpting characters and doing some more extreme 3D art, try every single method you've ever seen and maybe come up with your own, because you know, you don't have to follow a tutorial to the T. You don't have to do everything exactly like somebody else does. And so if you play around with something, and if you have something specifically that isn't working for you, like for instance, painting on eyes, you're like, oh my goodness, I hate painting on eyes. That's the worst part. Maybe don't paint them on. Maybe sculpt them on. You know, if that step isn't working for you, you know, rewrite the step is kind of my theory. So I'm going to be sculpting on her arms now. And so I have her start of her little jacket down, and the color I had for that also wasn't quite right. She has all these lovely earthy tones that just aren't in my acrylic collection. And so I did do some color correcting with paint later. So the better color for her jacket would have been a little bit more on like the goldenrod type of a color. And so not quite as brown as what I had. So if you have, you know, a better color option, use it. But this worked for me. You know, I can always fix things later. So then we're going to be doing a little bit of her eye lines with some black paint, doing a little bit of outlining here and there, just sort of cleaning up the upper lines of her eyes. That is something that I'm kind of borderline whether it's better to do with acrylic or better to do with paint, because both options are fantastic. You know, they have their different pros and cons for sure. But then I'm going to do her eyebrows with black. When you're sculpting in something like her eyebrows and like those little bits of acrylic that go around her eyes and anything that's really small, fine details like that, you're going to want to use wetter acrylic. So don't get it too powdery. Make sure that your acrylic is just a little bit on the softer side, and that'll give you a better time of pulling and stretching it. The other thing you want to think of when you're doing acrylic to make sure that it's the right texture for things is, you know, just pay attention to your brand, because some are going to work better than others. And so if you're doing acrylic or if you're using acrylic and you're used to using acrylic and it just doesn't seem to work for you, order a single color from a different brand and just try a different brand out and see if that works for you. Or, you know, if you happen to be fortunate enough to live and you have access to a nail art store, and I don't have access to a nail art store, unfortunately, but, you know, in a bigger metropolis type area, then you could go and you can, you know, see what brands they have and try things out and get just single colors at a time from a brand and get colors that are not glittery, just a pretty straightforward cream color, and that'll give you hopefully a better time of it. So one thing that I like to do when I'm playing around with a new type of acrylic is I like to pick up a few beads of the color and then just set them down and not actually try to use them. That kind of gives you a feel for what the texture of the acrylic is and what your monomer to powder ratio needs to be, because each brand is going to be different. So if you're somebody and you're just kind of learning and you're figuring out what brands work for you, once you find a brand that works for you, try to stick to it because it's easier to know what to expect when you pick up a bead if you're working just within a single brand, at least until you have some good experience under your belt and it's easier for you to sort of adjust your ratio according to what you're using. So now we're going to be sculpting her salakot with the same brown acrylic as I used for her jacket. So place a bead up above her head and then pull the acrylic down until it goes over her forehead and even slightly covers up her eyebrows. So if you were going to paint those eyebrows on, you are just going to know that you're not going to get to paint the whole eyebrow when you go to do it because some of it is covered by the brim of her salakot. And then you've got her, like the rest of it, just kind of bring it up. So that first bead, the main focus of it and the goal for it was to create a brim that had some height to it and some thickness so that it kind of stands up a little bit and adds some more dimension to it. And then add the top of it, the pointier area with that same brown, and then switching to a darker brown. Eventually you're going to add the very tip of the salakot. Just add another layer here and there and keep adding layers. This whole thing, when you're sculpting with acrylic, is you kind of need to build things up in layers because it's going to get more height and, just more uniformity if you try to do it, in several steps instead of doing everything at once. You're just going to have a better time of it. So there's the dark brown for the very tip. And I also washed a little bit of orange over the brim. So some orange acrylic very lightly over just the very brim of it. If you look at her particular salakot, if you look at images of it, it has a lot of detail and a lot of actually color variances throughout it. So you can kind of play around with it and add as much detail as you'd like. So now with some green acrylic, I'm going to be adding her skirt. And I had a horrible time finding reference photos for this because when I sculpted this set, it was not when there was as much around for the movie. It was I was a little bit ahead of the game and wanting to make sure that I got this done for the new movie coming out. And there just wasn't that much media available. And finding still images was even harder because most of them were blurry, screenshots taken from a preview. And there just isn't really that much out there yet. And I initially wasn't even going to sculpt anything beyond where I first cut off the design right about her waist. And then I decided I needed to make it a little longer so that it was a little bit more balanced on the nail. So I was like, all right, I'll add some skirt. And then I couldn't find any pictures of the skirt. It was so difficult, but we got it. And it was kind of a little bit of a winging it kind of a deal. But if you can get better photos, you may want to look them up to see what you can find later on. But we're going to add some pleats in the skirt and give it some texture. And then going back to that same brown that you have been using kind of throughout, we're going to be adding the belt that goes right around her waist and place that down. And then she's also got oh darn it, is it a sword? What is it? Oh goodness gracious. I don't know these things, but her weapon of choice that's sort of tucked behind her back. And so we've got that with the same brown again, adding another little layer of detail to her belt going through. And then after you have this, she does have some banding on her arms and you can sculpt that if you'd like to. I decided to do that with paint instead so that it wasn't, didn't stick up very far. It was a little bit more flesh with her skin. And that's completely optional, whatever you want to do there. And then I'm going to glue Raya onto the nail. And like I said, I'm kind of doing it offset on the nail, but making sure that the handle of her weapon is glued down because that part is a little bit more delicate than the rest. And so to make sure that that is strong, it does help to have that particular part attached to the nail. And then after it's glued, I'm going to fill in behind her with some clear acrylic to secure it to the nail for sure. And also just add some strength so that it does not break. And add those little bits of acrylic across the whole thing. And then after that's done, I'm going to take and we're going to do all of the detail with acrylic paint. So all of the finer detail that's basically left. So with some brown, I'm going to wash over her shirt and over the skirt because my colors, like I said, weren't quite earthy enough. And with that same diluted brown paint, I can add some shading to her skin too. So a little bit of shading on her arms, on her face, definitely around her nose area and her forehead. So her hat creates a little bit of shading. So you want to make sure that you add some extra shading on her face to kind of explain the shadows of the hat. Add some outlines here and there with black paint if you want to. The amount of outlining and detail is really up to you. There's a lot of different texture on her. In fact, the animation is just gorgeous. It's beautiful. There's so much. Like you can feel, when you watch it, you can feel the textures because they are so vivid and so intense and beautiful. So if you don't even want to watch the movie, maybe just take a moment to watch a preview to really feel that and appreciate the work that went into some of these new movies. Are just amazing. And the process to make them is pretty incredible too. If you haven't ever done any research, I know that Disney and Pixar have some educational information out there about how they actually go through and do the process of it. So it's really cool if you are interested in that kind of thing to see some of that. But we're going to do those armbands on her, add the details to her eyes. First, she has an iris with brown, a dark brown, and I added some of the texture on her salakot and her hat, or her hat, yeah, redundant, here I am, and her jacket, and then a little bit of the texture and the pleating on her skirt. And then after you're done with all that painting, you can apply a layer of gel sealer over the background, going in and around all of the different shapes that are glued onto the nail, really making sure that that background nail just shines. And then cure that and apply a layer of matte top coat over Raya, and that nail is done. Definitely check back tomorrow to see Sisu. The colors on that nail are so contradictory to the colors on the Raya nail. That goes from, super earthy and kind of solemn to very bright and Fantasyland type style. So it's just such a cool contrast. I absolutely love it. I hope you guys are as excited by these nails as I am. I love this style of kind of extreme over the top art. So I really enjoyed making these, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.